September 11th, 2001. It's a day that changed America forever, right? An act of terror by Al-Qaeda. But what's really fascinating and tragic is what happened next. The nation's response, well, it wasn't just aimed at the people who attacked them. It got channeled into a completely separate, catastrophic war. A war that was built on a huge, huge misunderstanding. I mean, even now, the numbers are just staggering to think about. 19 terrorists, they hijack 4 planes, and they kill 2,977 people at the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and in that field in Pennsylvania. And all that shock and grief, one thing was absolutely clear to everyone. Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, they were behind this. So that brings us to the real puzzle, the big question we're going to tackle. The attackers, they were based in Afghanistan, under the protection of the Taliban. So why, just a year and a half later, did the United States invade Iraq, a country that had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11? I mean, how does that even happen? Let's dig in. All right, so as America was trying to process all this grief, behind the scenes, the focus of the administration started to shift. And it shifted pretty quickly and very deliberately. Suddenly, the target wasn't just Al-Qaeda anymore. Something much bigger was taking shape. And then, bam, this was the moment it all went public. In the 2002 State of the Union address, President Bush drops this phrase, axis of evil, lumping Iraq with Iran and North Korea. You gotta understand, the language here was so powerful. It was designed to connect Saddam Hussein's regime in everyone's minds with terrorism and the threat of WMDs. So, the whole argument for going to war, the one that was repeated over and over and over again, really boiled down to 2 main points. 2 pillars, if you will. Pillar number 1, Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, and they are a massive, imminent threat. Pillar number 2, Saddam's regime is in cahoots with Al-Qaeda, the very same group that attacked the U.S. on 9/11. Okay, so you have these 2 giant claims, but were they actually standing on solid ground? Was there real evidence, or was something else going on here? Let's deconstruct this whole premise, and we'll start with the biggest claim of all. This right here. This was the big one. The WMD threat was, without a doubt, the #1 reason given for why war was necessary. They even used phrases like the smoking gun that could come in the form of a mushroom cloud. It was presented as this urgent, non-negotiable danger. This was the absolute cornerstone of the entire case for war. So, the invasion happens, U.S. forces are on the ground, they've taken Baghdad, and they start searching. Everywhere. And the number of active WMD programs, the number of actual weapons they found, was 0. A big fat 0. The single biggest reason for going to war, it just wasn't true. So you have to ask, how could the intelligence community get it that wrong? I mean, spectacularly wrong. Well, it wasn't just one simple mistake. It was more like a perfect storm of failures. You had intelligence agencies relying on Iraqi defectors who, let's be honest, had their own reasons for wanting Saddam gone. They were misinterpreting photos of regular civilian equipment as something sinister. And you can't ignore the immense political pressure from the top to find a reason, any reason to justify a war. Plus, and this is a big one, there hadn't been any weapons inspectors on the ground for 5 years. It was a huge blind spot. Okay, let's move on to that second pillar. The claim that Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda were partners. This was absolutely crucial because this was the emotional bridge connecting the Iraq War to 9/11. And, the administration really pushed this idea that they were working together. But here's the thing. The reality, it was the exact opposite. They weren't allies, they were enemies. Ideological enemies. Think about it. Saddam was a secular, nationalist dictator. He saw religious extremists as a direct threat to his power. Bin Laden, on the other hand, was an Islamic fundamentalist who saw guys like Saddam as apostates, as traitors to the faith. They literally couldn't have been more opposed to each other's worldview. And look, this isn't just some hindsight analysis. This is the official, definitive conclusion from the 9/11 Commission report. This was the most exhaustive investigation into the attacks, period. And what did they find? Quote, "We have no credible evidence that Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda cooperated on the attacks against the United States." Unambiguous. The link it wasn't real. It was a story. But that story, it worked. The message got through. Take a look at this poll from 2003. A staggering 69%, almost 7 out of 10 Americans, believed that Saddam Hussein was personally involved in 9/11, and this was with 0 actual evidence to back it up.
That shows you just how successfully that emotional connection was made in the public's mind.
So, let's recap. The war was launched on justifications that just crumbled under scrutiny, and the consequences of that decision, well, they were devastating, and they stretched on for years. Let's really look at what the true cost of this was.
First, the human cost for the United States, 4,424. That's how many American service members lost their lives in Iraq. And that number doesn't even begin to cover the tens of thousands more who were wounded, both physically and psychologically, in a conflict that dragged on for years.
And for the Iraqi people, the cost was just unimaginable. The most conservative estimates say that over 100,000 civilians were killed. But honestly, many other credible studies suggest the real number is much, much higher. When you factor in the violence, the breakdown of society, the disease, some estimates put the death toll closer to 1 million people. It's just a staggering loss of life.
Then there's the money. The financial cost to the U.S. was astronomical. We're talking $2 trillion in direct spending alone. And you have to remember, that number doesn't even touch the long-term costs, like healthcare for veterans, which will continue for decades.
But the fallout didn't stop when the last troops came home. Not even close. What the invasion really did was set off a chain reaction, a domino effect, that would throw the entire region into chaos for a generation. And you can see that cycle of instability play out so clearly. In 2003, the invasion completely shatters the Iraqi government, leaving this massive power vacuum. Then, in 2011, when U.S. combat troops pull out, that vacuum gets filled with brutal sectarian violence. And it was in that chaos that a local branch of Al-Qaeda in Iraq was able to grow and morph into something even more horrific: ISIS. So, when you really put these two events next to each other, the difference is just night and day, isn't it? 9/11 was a terrorist attack, plain and simple, carried out by Al-Qaeda. The Iraq War, on the other hand, was a war of choice. It was launched by a U.S.-led coalition based on intelligence that we now know was profoundly flawed. And its ultimate outcome wasn't victory, but a whole new level of instability and chaos. So, here's the bottom line, the key takeaway from all of this. The Iraq War was sold to the world as a direct and necessary response to the horror of 9/11. But all that grief, all that anger, all that fear that the country felt, it was pointed at a target that had nothing to do with the attack. That connection, that nexus, it was false. And that really leaves us with a heavy question, one that's still relevant today. What happens when a nation's very real, very understandable grief is channeled by flawed intelligence? And maybe the even bigger question is, when a mistake of this magnitude is made, with consequences this vast, what does accountability even look like?